make sure that you have your rulers opened up. If you don't, they're up in view and rulers. If not, you're going to have a really hard time with this because we want to be pretty specific about the inches that you choose to work with. Most of your pictures are going to be in kind of like a rectangle format. We're going to format this into the shape of a square. So the first thing we're going to do is go to your crop tool, which is over about 5th tool down. And up at the top here where it says width, height, and resolution, we're going to format this so it's an 8 by 8 inch square. Then you're going to keep it at 300 pixel per inch resolution because we would like this to be printed. And then I'm going to take my crop tool, and because it's in those constraints, it's going to stay within the square. And I'm going to find kind of like an interesting portion to work with. So somewhere maybe where there's like lots of positive and negative space down here. Take a portion that you can kind of experiment with and have little selections to go by. When you're done and you've identified an area, just click OK or click Enter, and you'll have your 8 by 8 square now. Next thing you want to do is go to File, and we're going to just hit Save As. We're going to title this last name _ Radial, and save it on your desktop. My desktop's kind of a mess right here, but for now I'm just going to save it. Okay. And then the next step we're going to do, this is where it's going to get a little confusing, so bear with me. First thing we're going to do is go down to your Layers palette. If this is not pulled up yet, go up to Window and Layers, and you should see this. You're going to make a new layer, which is down the bottom on this icon here. Create a new layer. And my layer is actually showing up transparent where there's these little grid lines here. It's a quick and easy fix. If you want to paint this layer, paint it white with your paint bucket, and you can just dump it on there. So now it's a white layer. Go back and switch to make sure that you have black as your color up front, because the next step you're going to need to actually see what you're doing on top of the white. So it looks like the background's not there, but it is. If I hide that, it's still there. So what we're going to do next is make a set of lines that's going to divide this space into 8 sections. So you're going to take your line tool down the bottom where your shapes are and make sure that it's a nice dark color. Black is fine. And you're going to start out with the middle. And if you see at the top, you've got 8 inches, so 4 exactly would be your middle portion. And when you float the cursor, you actually see the top, it's like toggling back and forth. So you want to make sure that you line up exactly at the 4-inch mark. When you click and drag, it's going to make your line, but if you hold down the Shift key while you do that, it's going to make it nice and straight. So I'm going to click and drag. Right now it's kind of, every which way. But if I hold down the Shift key, it's going to kind of automatically make that so it stays straight. And we're going to go all the way to the end. And you'll see it shows up as a new shape. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. So you got your 4-inch mark right here. Toggle that together, straight across. All right, and sometimes they show up in like one whole shape unit. Doesn't really matter how many of these shapes because we're going to flatten them together anyhow. Next step is going to be to divide it in the corner. Now here you can also hold down the Shift key because it'll give you a perfect diagonal. Corner to corner, like that. And same thing here. Make sure it's lined up perfect. If it's not right, if it winds up being like off a little bit, go back and redo it. You can totally do that. All right, so now I have a couple different shapes here. We're going to merge all 3 of these layers together. So what you do is select, hit Shift, and then select all the layers together that you want to merge. So all your shapes and your layer here that's white. If you have right-click enabled, right-click and hit Merge Layers. Now you have one layer on top. It's going to make it a lot easier for you to manage. And then you have your bottom, which is your background, which is still there. Okay. Next step. We're going to make a selection in the form of one of these triangles, and then we're going to apply it to the background. so that you can create a selection that you want. So pick a triangle, any triangle, and we're going to use one of your selection tools under here. So far we've used like the elliptical marquee or the rectangle marquee, but underneath there's a couple other ones that some of you have used. We've used the lasso. There's one called the polygonal lasso tool and one called the magnetic lasso. I like the polygonal lasso tool because it allows me to be very precise about where I'm selecting. So if you click in one triangle area and drag down to the corner, click again, and click again to complete that selection, you'll see now there's a marching ants bounding box here. That bounding box will stay active even if you hide that back layer. Now it's open on your background. Now you can move this triangle around to identify an interesting area. So let's say I like this selection down here. I would pick that, and we're going to make a selection that will show up as a new layer on top of here. If you don't like this one, then you can hit Command D, go back to your original top portion here, and you can maybe select another area of the triangle that was a little bit more interesting, maybe one that's down here. Click and drag, click and drag. Okay, so now I have another triangle. I can hide this layer and then move this around, and perhaps that's more interesting. Or maybe up here. So play around with this. Get something that you think is going to be interesting, considering things like elements and principles. And then once you have an area that you've selected that you're happy with, we're going to move on to the next step. So make sure you're on your background, because we actually want to take this selection right here. And we're going to go up to Edit, Copy, and Edit, Paste. And you'll see a new layer has now shown up that has that exact layer, that little selection that you've created. So if I hide my background, here's my selection. So this layer, that can actually be moved around wherever. And I'm going to make sure this is moved to the top so it's overlapping. So we're going to fit that into the original triangle selection that you had. Okay, from here, our goal is to get this to be flipped and rotated all the way around until we come back to the original. And it will make our radial design. So from your layer, if you have right-click enabled, you can hit Duplicate Layer, and it'll keep coming up saying that it's a copy. So you can either keep this layer 1 copy, or in my case, I like to just do layer 2, so that in the end, you're going to have 8 of these individual layers of that triangle. So I have another layer here. It looks like nothing happened, but when I go to move that, now you have an exact copy. Some of these layers can be rotated. Others need to be flipped to make sure that you have a mirror image. So in this case, let's say I'm going to go and fill in this triangle where I am right there. You can do something called flipping, and that's under the Edit menu. You go to Edit, Transform, and then Flip. We want to flip it horizontally so it goes to the opposite side. So if it flips horizontally, now we have it here, and it would kind of just snap in and make an exact. All right, now each time you can continue to copy just this one layer so that you have like 8 of these individual triangles, or you could choose to merge these two together and create a single layer from that. Okay, so now we have one triangle here. This triangle can then be duplicated. Duplicate. And now this is another layer. All right, now this one doesn't really have to be flipped horizontally or vertically. You can just go to something called Edit, Free Transform, and we can rotate so that it fits and lines up. Okay, the idea is to make sure that we're really kind of following those guidelines and making sure there's no like white areas in between. So that's where like the precision comes into play and making sure that you're meeting it together in the middle. And click OK. So you can continue to do that, or at this point, now that you have 2 layers together, you can click and merge. Now you have your final copy here. This can be duplicated. And now this can also be rotated. So you can do your free transform, you can rotate and flip. Okay, and then float it down with your keyboard keys. And now you have a full radial. Oh, look, I get a round of applause. How nice. So, if there's still like, if you have a little bit of extra areas here, that's okay. You can go back and you can actually crop all of that. So we can merge this down. We can take everything here when you're happy with it. Merge layers. And it'll be all on one copy like this. From here, we can do a final kind of clean up crop here. All right, so 8 by 8, we'll kind of put it right into the center. And now you have your completed radial design.